It was 9:40 on a Tuesday night when my daughter sent me a text that, to anyone else, would have meant absolutely nothing. Porch lights burned out again. I'll fix it. But I do not have a porch. And 23 years ago, when she was 8 years old, I taught her that exact sentence for one reason only. It meant I am in danger. I cannot say it out loud. Come now. My daughter worked for her father, the man who spent 30 years calling me the Navy secretary in front of dinner guests. The man with the tower, the empire, and the award with his name on it. He believed I was nothing. He had a reign. After that one text, he had 8 hours of it left. He just did not know it yet. Here is what this story will give you. It is proof that the person everyone underestimates is often the one quietly holding all the power, and that real strength almost never needs to raise its voice. If you have ever been the quiet one in your family, the one they talked over, stay with me to the end. This story is for you, and if it speaks to you, do something small that means a lot. Tap like so, more people find it. Leave a comment telling me if you have ever been underestimated. Share it with a woman who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss the next one. Now let me take you back to where it began.
It was a Tuesday, 9:40 at night. My daughter texted me something that, to anyone else, would have meant nothing at all. I was standing in my kitchen near the marina, reading glasses pushed up on my nose, a glass of wine poured and already forgotten. The phone buzzed against the counter. I picked it up the way you pick up anything at 60 years old. Slow, expecting nothing. The message said, "Hey Mom, can't make Sunday after all. Porch lights burned out again. I'll fix it. Love you." I set the wine bottle down. I did not finish pouring because I do not have a porch. I live one floor up, above a bait shop, with a window that sticks every summer. And 23 years ago, when Emily was 8 years old, I taught her that exact sentence for one reason only. Porch lights burned out again meant, I am in danger. I cannot say it out loud. Come now. I spent 25 years in the Navy. Most people who knew me back then thought I shuffled paper. That was the safest kind of truth. What I really did was follow money that did not want to be followed. The kind that hides inside shell companies and quiet signatures. The kind that ruins families and buries the people who notice. I learned that panic erases language. Fear scrambles the brain. A phrase you practiced as a child survives anything. So I taught both my children a code, and then I prayed for 2 decades that neither of them would ever need it. Now Emily had used it, and she worked for her father. For 30 years, that man had looked at me across dinner tables and called me the Navy secretary. He said it with a grin, the way some people use the word joking to cover damage they have no intention of fixing. Frank Dalton built an empire on charm and other people's trust. Part of the foundation under that empire was the story that his ex-wife was a scattered, fragile woman who could not balance a checkbook. He had a reign. Investor galas, a civic award, a tower with his name on the glass. He had about 8 hours of it left. He just did not know that yet. I called Emily. It rang once and went to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I did not panic. I prepared. That is a different thing. And the difference is the whole story. I opened the drawer where I keep a worn leather notebook. Frank used to laugh at that notebook. Look, he would say to his guests, Maggie's senior citizen planner. Inside were names and numbers I had not dialed in years. People who understood urgency without an explanation. I dialed the first one. A sleepy voice answered. Whitfield. It's Sullivan, I said. My voice was very calm. Calm is not the absence of fear. Calm is control on top of fear. And I had 30 years of practice. Maggie. She was awake instantly. What happened? My daughter just sent me the duress phrase, I said, and I think her father is the reason. There was a silence on the line. Then Dana Whitfield, the sharpest young lawyer I knew, said the only correct thing. Tell me where to start. I looked at the second drawer, the one I almost never opened. Inside was a small encrypted drive and a Navy Challenge coin worn smooth from years in a uniform pocket. I had spent 30 years letting Frank Dalton believe I was nothing. He was about to learn exactly what the quiet one had been doing all that time. Let me take you back 1 week. so you understand what I was walking into. The Dalton Wealth Advisors Investor Appreciation Gala was the event of the season in our county. Frank was going to receive an award that night, Financial Citizen of the Year. There would be a stage, a chandelier, a live stream, and 400 people who believed every word he said. I had 30 years of reasons not to believe him. I want you to understand the mockery, because it was never loud. Loud cruelty is easy to leave. Frank's cruelty was social and deniable. At a dinner party, he would smile and tell the table, "My ex thinks a portfolio is something you carry papers in." Everyone would laugh, and I would smile, and the laughter would settle one more thin layer of cement over who people thought I was. He did it in front of our children, too. "Your mother filed memos for the government," he told Brett once. "That is the whole resume. Here is the part I am not proud of. I never corrected him. My work had been classified. Saying otherwise was not allowed. And after enough years, silence stops being a rule and becomes a habit, and then the habit becomes a cage you forget you are sitting in." My best friend Ruth came by that week with a bottle of wine and an opinion. "Go to the gala," Ruth said. "Hold your head up. Let them all see you. You do not walk into a man's house to embarrass him," I told her. "You walk in when you can take the house." Ruth studied me over her glass. "Maggie, sometimes I think you are still on an operation." She was not entirely wrong. The cost of all that patience sat right there in my own family. My daughter Emily half believed the scattered mom story. My son Brett believed it completely. Brett worked for his father now, Frank's right hand at the firm, and he had started speaking in his father's voice. He's took me to lunch that week to manage me. "Dad's worried you'll make a scene at the gala," Brett said. He stirred his coffee and did not look up. "Maybe sit this one out." "I have no intention of making a scene," I said. "There's something else." Now he looked up, and something flickered across his face that I did not like. "Emily's been struggling emotionally. Dad's thinking about putting her on leave for her own good." I kept my face still, but underneath, an old instinct woke up. The one that had kept people alive overseas, the one that notices when a sentence has a second sentence, hiding inside it. They were not protecting Emily. They were building a paper trail that said she was unstable. I did not know why yet. I filed it. That was Thursday. The text came the following Tuesday. Porch lights burned out again, and every soft, careful thing I had been for 30 years began, mile by mile, to fall away. I could not reach Emily by phone, because Frank monitored everything that moved through the firm. So I did the thing my training had taught me before email existed. I sent a message the old way and waited in a back booth of a coffee shop 2 towns over. She came in fast, glancing at the door before she sat, and my heart cracked, because that is exactly how I used to teach frightened people to walk into a room. "Mom," she whispered, "I think I'm in real trouble." "Tell me," I said slowly. Emily worked reconciliations, the unglamorous job of matching money that left the firm against money that should have left the firm. 3 weeks earlier, she had found a gap. Client funds were flowing out through a feeder account called Meridian Anchor Partners, a county teacher's retirement account. Dozens of elderly investors, money draining out quietly, dressed up as ordinary transfers. "I brought it to Dad," she said. Her hands shook around the paper cup. "I thought he'd be glad I caught it." "What did he do?" He smiled. Her voice went thin. "He didn't deny it. He showed me 3 transfer authorizations with my signature on them. He said, 'You're already in it, sweetheart. If this ever comes out, it's your name, not mine.'" There it was. A father had built a trapdoor and stood his own daughter on top of it. This is the part of the story where I have to be honest about something, because you may be carrying a version of it yourself. There is a particular cruelty in being trapped by the person who is supposed to protect you. The world tells you to go to family when you are in danger. But what do you do when the danger is family? Emily had spent 3 weeks trapped between loyalty and survival, unable to tell who to trust, because the man setting the trap was the man who taught her to ride a bicycle. If you have ever sat in that exact silence, you already understand my daughter's face. "I photographed them," Emily said suddenly. "The authorizations, the Meridian routing, on my personal phone before he could lock me out." She slid the phone across the table. I looked at the routing numbers the way other people read a grocery list. The skill that Frank had mocked for 30 years opened the whole thing up in front of me. Meridian fed into a shell, the shell fed into a real estate vehicle, and the real estate vehicle had Frank's fingerprints all over it. Emily, I said, listen to me. You are not going to fix this by being good and quiet. I tried that. It does not work on men like your father. I covered her shaking hand with mine. We are going to do it the other way. We are going to make it airtight, and then we are going to hand it to people who can end his reign for good. His reign, she repeated, almost a laugh, almost a sob. You sound like you've done this before. I have, I said, just never to someone I used to love. By the next morning, I had a kitchen table full of allies and a plan. Dana Whitfield brought the law. Walt Brennan, my old JAG friend, brought 40 years of caution. Maggie, Walt said, tapping the photos, this is federal. This goes to the Securities and Exchange Commission, not to a courtroom brawl with Frank. I intend to take it to the SEC, I said. I just want it perfect first. The second Frank smells an investigation, he will burn the trail and pin every ash of it on Emily. That was the trap inside the trap. The evidence that could free my daughter could also convict her, depending on who held it and how the story got told. Then a gift walked in the door. Grace Holloway, Frank's executive assistant of 20 years, called me and asked to meet somewhere quiet. Grace had spent 2 decades watching, filing, and saying nothing. Her conscience had finally gotten louder than her paycheck. Off-book client calls and a list of names. Victims. One name stopped me cold. Eleanor Pratt, 76 years old. A retired schools teacher whose entire savings had vanished into Meridian. Drove out to see Eleanor that afternoon. Because a spreadsheet is a number and a person is a reason. She made tea with hands that trembled, and she told me, with terrible dignity, Frank held my hand at my husband's funeral. He looked me in the eye and said he would take care of me. That was the moment this stopped being about my marriage. I did not want revenge anymore. I wanted to stand between Frank Dalton and every Eleanor Pratt he had ever smiled at. But Frank moved faster than I expected. Because the gala was his coronation, and he would let nothing threaten it. He suspended Emily, medical leave, he called it, which cut her access and isolated her in one stroke. He fed a friendly reporter a soft story about his award that mentioned his long recovery from a difficult marriage to an unwell ex-wife. And then he filed for a restraining order against me. He cited harassment and documented instability, and a tired judge signed a temporary order. Just like that, I was legally barred from the gala, barred from the firm, barred from contacting my own daughter. I sat in my dark condo that night and felt the floor drop out. Framed daughter, hostile son, a court order gagging me. The man I was trying to stop was winning on every single front, and he was doing it with my own old weapon. The story that I was fragile and confused. For one long hour, I believed I had lost everything. Then I thought about Eleanor Pratt's trembling hands, and I stood up. Here is something I have learned about people who hurt the ones they should protect. They almost always run a pattern. And a pattern, once you see it, is just a map. The very next day, the pattern showed me something I never expected. Everyone assumed Vanessa, Frank's younger second wife, was his pampered accomplice. I assumed it too. The trophy on his arm at the gala, smiling for the cameras. She contacted me in secret, and her hands shook worse than Eleanor's. I am not his partner, Vanessa said. I am his next fall guy. Years ago, Frank had put their marital finances and a fraudulent loan guarantee entirely in her name. She was as trapped as Emily. A second woman lined up to take the blame when the empire finally cracked. Quietly, in fear, Vanessa had been recording her husband. She played me one. Frank's voice, relaxed and proud, describing Meridian as the cleanest money he ever moved, naming exactly whose signatures he had forged. The woman everyone wrote off as a gold digger was the best witness in the building. Frank's whole pattern, trap the women and blame the women, was about to become the rope that hanged him. That should have been enough good news for 1 week. It was not the last surprise. I needed to prove that Emily's signatures were forged, so I pulled the metadata on the authorization files. Metadata is the quiet truth underneath a document, the record of who made it and when. The trail led to a workstation inside the firm, and it was not the one I expected. It led to Brett, my son. I sat in my car outside his apartment, for 10 minutes before I could make myself knock. When he opened the door and saw my face, he already knew. "Did you forge your sister's signature?" I asked. Brett's face came apart. "He told me it was a compliance gap," he said. "He told me everybody does it." I didn't understand what I was signing her up for until it was done. He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. And then I realized, Mom, he's going to let both of us take the fall. Emily and me. He's keeping the money offshore, and he's leaving his own kids holding it. I have stood in rooms with hardened criminals. Nothing ever hollowed me out like watching my son confess that his father had made him a weapon against his sister. But here is the thing about a man's children. They keep things out of love and out of fear. "I saved the files," Brett whispered, "the originals, and his instructions, in case I needed to prove it wasn't my idea." Frank Dalton had built his reign by trapping the people closest to him. He had just handed me his own children as witnesses. Now I needed someone with the power to act, and I knew exactly who to call. 20 years earlier, a young analyst was about to be scapegoated for a leak she did not cause. I had testified that the leak came from elsewhere, and I had saved her career. Her name was Susan Vance, and she was now an enforcement director at the Securities and Exchange Commission. I want to be clear about something, because the movies get it wrong. Susan did not owe me a favor. People in real work do not move on favors. What she owed me was the standard, to do the job right. So when I laid out the Meridian Trail, the forged authorizations, Grace's ledger, Vanessa's recordings, Brett's files, and Eleanor's statement, she did not gush. She opened a formal inquiry and subpoenaed Meridian's servers. The net began to close. And then, 48 hours before the gala, before Susan could serve Frank, everything collapsed at once. Walt Brennan had a heart attack. The man who could authenticate our chain of custody was in intensive care. Grace was fired and her firm devices seized for audit. The original ledger appeared to be gone. Vanessa's phone went missing after Frank's security swept the house. The recordings apparently wiped, and Frank escalated. His lawyers turned the restraining order into a fraud referral against me and Emily both, framing the mother and daughter as the conspirators, timed so that we would be arrested on the morning of the gala. Frank Dalton, the brave whistleblower who turned in his own sick family. Brett, terrified all over again, was being pressured to recant. I spent that night in the dark, and I am going to tell you the truth about it, because I think you have had a night like it. Even if the details were different, I felt like I had lost everything for the second time. Gagged by a court, framed beside my own children, my witnesses silenced, my evidence vanished, handcuffs waiting in the morning. Every door I tried was already locked. Maybe you have stood at the bottom of something like that. A diagnosis, a betrayal, a phone call that split your life into before and after, where the people who were supposed to catch you are the ones who let go. If you have been there, then you know that the dark is not the hard part. The hard part is deciding, in the dark, whether you still believe you can stand up. Emily found me sitting in that dark. She knelt in front of me and took both my hands, the way I used to take hers when she was small and afraid of a thunderstorm. "Mom," she said, "I spent years half believing his version of you. I was wrong. Whatever you really are, be it now." I looked at my daughter, and I started very quietly to smile, because Frank had made one mistake that he could never undo. He thought he had erased everything. He did not know who he had spent 30 years underestimating. "Emily," I said, "I need you to understand how I survived a career chasing people who hide money. There is one rule that keeps you alive. You never trust a single copy of anything." She frowned, but he wiped it all. He wiped what he could see. I walked her through it, and I watched hope come back into her face like color returning to a cold hand. Grace's ledger had auto-synced every night to an off-site account I had set up the very day we met. The original being seized changed nothing. The copy was sitting safe. Vanessa's recordings had backed up to a cloud locker the moment she handed me her phone, before Frank's people ever touched it. Brett's forgery files were already inside Susan Vance's evidence chain, subpoenaed, not borrowed. You cannot delete what the government has already photographed. And then the keystone, the piece Frank never imagined. When the SEC subpoenaed Meridian's servers, I told Emily, They mirrored everything before Frank's people ran their wipe. He torched a trail that federal investigators had already copied 24 hours earlier. I let that settle. He destroyed evidence that no longer needed protecting. All he did was add destruction of evidence to the list. Emily breathed out slowly. So when he tries to use the wiped files as proof, there was nothing there. The originals will already be in the room. There was one more thing, and it was the part that made me certain. Susan Vance had timed the enforcement action. Frank had scheduled our arrest for 9 o'clock in the morning, on the day of his gala, in front of his own cameras, to make himself the hero turning in his family. Susan was going to serve her action at the same event, 8:45. He is going to be 15 minutes too late, I said. And the best part, Emily, he built the stage himself. He invited 400 people, the press, and a live stream to watch him be honored. Emily stared at me. You're going to end it in front of all of them. I am not going to end it, I said. He already did, the day he forged your name. I am just going to be there when the truth catches up to him. I squeezed her hand, and I am going to do it without raising my voice once. That is the part your father will never understand. He thinks strength is loud. The strongest thing I have ever done, I did quietly. I could not legally enter that ballroom. The restraining order saw to that, but Dana Whitfield could, and Susan Vance could, and Vanessa, Brett, and Grace could. A reign does not always end with a shout. Sometimes it ends with a roomful of people finally hearing a quiet woman's evidence read aloud. The night of the gala, the ballroom glittered like Frank's whole life had been leading to it. Chandeliers, 400 guests, a screen the size of a sail with his name across it, a camera crew live streaming his coronation to the county. I was not allowed inside, so I sat in a van in the parking garage with a headset and a screen, exactly where I had spent the most important nights of my career. In the dark, listenings. While other people walked into the light, Dana was inside, seated near the front, Emily beside her, cleared by Susan to attend as a protected witness. Vanessa at a side table. Brett near the back, pale and steady. Grace by the doors. Each of them a piece of a case Frank thought he had erased. Frank took the stage to thunderous applause. He looked radiant. He had already arranged for police to quietly remove me and Emily before dessert. A discreet humiliation caught on his own live stream. Security began moving toward Emily's table. For one breath, it looked like the trap was closing on us after all. Then the back doors opened. Susan Vance walked in with SEC enforcement staff and 2 United States Marshals. Crossed the ballroom while Frank was mid-sentence and served him an asset freeze and enforcement action. On stage, into the microphone, in front of 400 people. The room gasped. Frank Dalton did not flinch. That was the terrifying thing about him. He pivoted instantly, the showman, and pointed across the room at our daughter. "This is them," he said smoothly, his voice carrying through the speakers. "My own family has been stealing from our clients. I discovered it. I reported it. It breaks my heart. But the fraud you are looking for is sitting at that table." And for one sick moment, the crowd believed the confident man with the microphone. I watched 400 faces tilt toward Emily with suspicion. The swing went against us. Then Dana stood and asked for 3 minutes. Susan allowed it, because the package was already filed and nothing said in that room could change what the government already held. On the giant screens, the ones built to celebrate Frank Dalton, Dana put up the evidence, the Meridian wire trail, the forged authorizations created on Brett's workstation, not Emily's, with timestamps that proved it, off book calls. And then, into the silence of that beautiful room, she played Vanessa's recording. Frank's own voice rolled out of the speakers, relaxed and proud, calling Meridian the cleanest money he ever moved, naming the signatures he had forged. 400 people sat in their evening clothes and listened to the king describe his own theft. In his own voice, under the screen with his own name on it, Frank reached for one last card. He produced an email he claimed I had sent, coordinating the fraud. Susan stepped forward. That email, she said, was sent after Meridian's accounts were federally frozen. The only person who could have produced that timestamp is the person operating the shell. Frank Dalton had framed me so thoroughly that he had signed his own name to the crime. His reign did not end with a gunshot or a gavel. It ended with a man undone by the exact lie he had spent 30 years building. I expected to feel triumphant in that parking garage. I did not. I felt the way you feel after a long operation finally closes, tired down to the bone, and strangely sad, because I had once loved the man being led out of that ballroom in front of everyone he had ever tried to impress. Brett did the bravest thing I have ever seen him do. When Frank tried, even then, to shift the blame onto his children, Brett stood up in that ballroom and said it plainly, into the room and the cameras. My father ordered me to forge my sister's signature. I did it. It was wrong, and I will not let him hide behind us anymore. Cost him. He would face his own consequences for the forgery, but he chose his mother and his sister over the empire, and a son who finally tells the truth is worth more than a son who never had to. Eleanor Pratt was there too. Susan had quietly invited a few of the victims. Eleanor did not shout or weep. She simply stood near the side of the room in her good coat, looking at Frank, and her quiet presence was the only verdict that mattered. The schoolteacher he had lied to at a funeral, standing upright while his rain came down. They led Frank out past the screen that still bore his name. He was not roaring. He was small, and I had never once raised my voice. In the weeks that followed, the machinery of the law did what it does slowly. The Securities and Exchange Commission recovered and restored the looted accounts. The teacher's retirement fund was made whole. Eleanor Pratt got her savings back. She mailed me a card with a single line inside, in careful schoolteacher handwriting. Thank you for standing where I could not. I keep it on my refrigerator. Emily was fully cleared. The forgery was proven, her name wiped clean. And she made a choice that told me she had become someone stronger than I ever managed to be at her age. She left finance. She retrained to advocate for fraud victims, the elderly especially, the people who never see the trap until it is already closed. A lot of people don't recognize a trap until someone older names it for them. She told me one evening, "You named it for me, Mom. I want to do that for somebody else." Vanessa walked free of Frank's debts, a protected witness rebuilding her own name. The last I heard, she had gone back to her maiden name, the way I once had. I understood that better than anyone. Brett faced what he had to face. But by telling the truth when it cost him, he earned the right to rebuild, slowly, with me. Real healing is slow. I let it be slow. I had learned the hard way that the people who demand instant forgiveness usually have not earned it, and the people who deserve it rarely ask. And me. I drove home to my small condo by the marina, the one Frank used to call sad and beneath me. I took my old Navy commission certificate out of the bottom drawer where it had lived in the dark for 30 years, and I hung it on the wall in the front room, where anyone who walked in would see it. For the first time in 3 decades, I let myself be known. People decide who you are based on how quiet you keep. For 30 years, the man I married looked at me and saw a woman who poured the coffee and typed the memos. He told that story so often, so smoothly, that my own children half believed it. And here is the part I am not proud of. So did I, a little. I let the lie stand because the truth was classified, and because hiding had become easier than being known. I want to tell you the thing it took me 60 years and 1 terrible week to understand. So lean in. Because if you have ever been the underestimated one, this last part is yours. Being underestimated is not always an insult. Sometimes it is the only advantage you will ever be handed. The people who think you are nothing will say everything in front of you. They will leave the door wide open because they cannot imagine you walking through it. I built an entire case inside a family that never once thought I was paying attention. But hear the harder truth, the one I almost missed, because I do not want you to miss it. Silence has a cost, and I paid it. I was so proud of being the calm one, the patient one, the one who never made a scene, that I let my own children grow up, not really knowing their mother. I taught my daughter a secret code for the worst day of her life, and I never taught her the simplest thing of all, that she could come to me on the ordinary days too. Armor that you never take off stops being protection. It becomes a wall, and the people who love you end up on the other side of it. So if you are the quiet one in your family, the one they talk over, the one they assume cannot manage money or cannot manage life, hear me clearly. Your worth was never up for a family vote. You do not have to wait for the person who dismissed you to finally see you. You do not need his apology to be whole. I never got one from Frank, and I want you to notice that I am fine. The wholeness did not come from him at last understanding me. It came from Emily Safe and Brett Honest and Eleanor Pratt's savings back where they belonged. And you do not have to choose between being gentle and being strong. That is the lie that traps so many good women. The strongest thing I ever did, I did without raising my voice. I did it with patience, with kept receipts, and with a refusal to let a powerful man rob people who could not fight back. Protect the ones who cannot protect themselves. Keep your own copies of everything. Teach the people you love a way to reach you, and then make sure they know they never need a code to do it. Always comes. Do not shout. Just follow the money. The truth does not need to be loud. It only needs to be kept. If this story reached someone you have been thinking about, a mother, a sister, a quiet woman in your own life whose history you never asked about, then reach out to her this week. Do not wait for an emergency to find out who someone really is. You may be surprised what the quiet one has been carrying all along. And if stories about underestimated women finally being seen are the kind you want more of, subscribe and stay with me because I share a new one every week. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated by the people who should have known you best? I read every single one. One last thing before you go, and I mean this as a real warning, not a story. The most common way families lose everything is not a dramatic crime. It is a quiet signature and a name borrowed without permission, forged authorizations, feeder funds you have never heard of, a trusted advisor moving money just to fix a gap. It is happening to ordinary people right now, and the ones who set the trap almost always plan for someone else to take the blame. Read what you sign. Keep your own records. Ask who really controls the account. And if someone you trust ever tells you that your name is already on something you never agreed to, do not go quiet. That is exactly when you follow the money. Thank you for spending this time with me. I will see you next week.
People decide who you are based on how quiet you keep. For 30 years, the man I married saw a woman who poured the coffee and typed the memos, and he told that story so often that even my own children half believed it. And the hardest part to admit is that, for a while, so did I. So let me leave you with what it took me 60 years and one terrible week to understand. Being underestimated is not always an insult. Sometimes it is the only advantage you will ever be handed. The people who think you are nothing will say everything in front of you, and they will leave the door wide open because they cannot imagine you walking through it. But there is a harder truth underneath that one, and I do not want you to miss it. Silence has a cost. I was so proud of being the calm one, the patient one, the one who never made a scene, that I let the people I love grow up on the other side of a wall I built myself. Armor that you never take off stops protecting you. It just keeps everyone out. So if you are the quiet one, hear me clearly. Your worth was never up for a family vote. You do not have to wait for the person who dismissed you to finally see you. You do not need their apology to be whole. And you never have to choose between being gentle and being strong, because the strongest thing I ever did, I did without raising my voice. Protect the ones who cannot protect themselves. Keep your own copies of everything. Teach the people you love a way to reach you, and then make sure they know they never need a secret code to do it. And when the moment finally comes, and it always comes, do not shout. Just follow the truth. It does not need to be loud. It only needs to be kept. If this story reached someone you have been thinking about, a mother, a sister, a quiet woman whose history you never asked about, reach out to her this week. Do not wait for an emergency to find out who someone really is. And if stories like this matter to you, leave a like, share your own story in the comments, send this to someone who needs it, and subscribe to stay with me. A new story comes every week. This content was researched, built, and edited by hand by our team with the sole purpose of bringing you meaning and a lasting lesson. Thank you for spending this time with us. We will see you in the next story.